I really want to talk about this idea that I'm extremely passionate about and has been very top of mind for me over these last few weeks. Um, because it's come up in numerous interactions, and I had a few interactions where I feel like this revealed the underlying structure of so much of modern life and what I feel a lot of people struggle with but might not be able to articulate. And that idea is this concept called generosity of interpretation. Okay. And I heard this actually years ago in a talk by Alain de Botton on YouTube called Why You Will Marry the Wrong Person. And that talk was so impactful for me because I felt like it presented such a profound understanding of love. So, in that talk, Alain de Botton describes love as generosity of interpretation. And what that means is, as he describes it, it's the willingness to look beyond someone's surface level communication or actions to the person, to who the person really is deep down, or the needs they really have deep down. And in that talk, Alain de Botton described generosity of interpretation or love as, in relationships, it can be hard to communicate exactly how we truly feel, right? And humans are very tricky, and we have these deep seated emotional needs that need to be met. So rather than saying to our spouse, "Do you still love me?" We might say, "Did you do the dishes? Did you take out the garbage?" And we ask these sort of indirect questions in order to try to get what we want or need from the other person, which is a sense of assurance, a sense of support, a sense of emotional regulation. And I recognize that that can be somewhat of an abstract concept, but I want to relate this to, everyday interactions, okay? And the clearest example I can give of this is, say you're at a grocery store and you ask the cashier, "How are you doing? How are you really doing?" Right? How out of 10 cashiers, how many of those cashiers do you think would give you an honest response about how they're really doing? I would say none of them. And that's not a problem, right? Not every social environment is an appropriate place for that level of emotional depth. There's no trust. There's people waiting around to be served. They don't know you. They don't trust you. They don't know how you're going to handle that response. People don't want to trauma dump on one another. But the thing is that what I've noticed is that this lack of generosity of interpretation, it happens in most social environments. So, when you go hang out with your friends or coworkers, you know, most people aren't entering that space from a place of sincerity and a place of emotional honesty. And that's not a criticism on anyone. That's just the way the social world works. We almost entirely, in most respects, live in primarily transactional social containers, right? Work, going to a store, having an interaction with the cashier. We have friends, obviously, and we have family members. But even in those social environments and containers, emotional honesty isn't always wanted or appreciated. It's often even beyond that. It's not that it's not even wanted, it's actively, it feels inherently dangerous to some people. So why is that? Why does emotional honesty and sincerity feel dangerous? Because we are all operating under certain social norms and assumptions to try to maintain a level of balance and a level of togetherness. You know, people don't feel that if they're honest, people want to hear that. People don't feel that if they are honest about how they truly feel, it will be received well. So, as someone that enters situations with that emotional sincerity of, I ask someone how they are, I truly want to know how they are. What I'm often met with is defendedness, or the idea of emotional depth is very scary to people because they've never been in an environment that has modeled that that can be safe. The only place often that you can be truly honest with one another about your feelings is in therapy. And some people never even go to therapy in their whole life. There's a real stigma still around therapy, much less so than there was 5, 10 years ago, to be sure. But let's not be let's be honest. Therapy is still seen in some ways as, oh, there's something wrong with you, you're weak, right? And a lot of men, I think in particular, still see this sort of stigma around having feelings and emotions because it's seen as weak. So I want to relate this back to this point because I've experienced a tremendous amount of grief over the lack of generosity of interpretation there is in the world. It feels like most people in the world are committed to misunderstanding one another. People are entering interactions and conversations not from a place of listening and empathy, but from a place of defendedness, of emotional flattening, and of insincerity. It's people are coming into these interactions and conversations with a preformed worldview about how other people are. People are chastised for having emotions or displaying vulnerability because it's seen as weak. Some people can't handle that. And I think it's really sad because, as someone that truly wants to have genuine, honest interactions, emotional interactions, it's almost impossible in most respects. And I just feel like this is something that we could all be doing a better job of. And I think there is a lot of nuance here. I don't think that you should be trauma dumping on people, but I think there's a difference between trauma dumping and just genuinely saying, yeah, things are tough right now, because I think everyone is experiencing some level of difficulty or challenge in their life. And these days, it's like probably one of the main ones is just financial pressure, right? Economic pressure and the stress that creates and the roles and responsibilities we have to maintain in order to just get by. And I don't want to ramble too much, but I just feel like this concept, generosity of interpretation, is so powerful because, one of the greatest gifts we could give one another is just to be seen, or just to see one another and truly hear one another. And I just think it's a real shame that most people have learned that, it's not safe to be emotionally honest. And what people always tell me, I go into an interaction hoping that there is compassion in this interaction, that there's emotional honesty. People tell me, you shouldn't expect compassion from other people. You don't know these people. People are busy with their own lives. Not everyone is comfortable with compassion. Not everyone wants compassion in an interaction. And I don't blame anyone for that. I truly don't. I don't expect compassion, but I experience some level of grief over the lack of compassion that happens in interactions on a day-to-day basis. And in some respects, I've had a few interactions over the past few months where I've left an interaction and I felt somewhat hurt because the interaction never left that surface level social performance where everyone is just sort of playing out these social roles and keeping things on an even keel. And this isn't a criticism against anyone. I'm simply expressing that, it feels like sometimes when I get home and I feel like, I was hoping to have a meaningful interaction with people and then I don't, I can sometimes get into like a lowered emotional state. And I sort of grieve over the fact that we can't have this sense of human connection. And what happens when you're in a lowered emotional state is the people around you get kind of upset. They go, oh, why are you down after that? And it's this idea that the people most affected by harmful social norms are seen as dysfunctional, whereas the people that have come to adapt to social norms are seen as more successful. So people who have come to accept the status quo and have, People are doing this in many different ways. Some people are defended. Some people just hide it. Some people are genuinely just not affected by this stuff. But the people that are more affected by these harmful social norms are seen as weak and inferior. And when I've noticed, when you don't have as much energy to contribute because you experienced, some level of discomfort or disengagement or whatever word you want to use, then all of a sudden it's like there's a problem with you because you haven't learned to adapt to these somewhat harmful social norms. So I feel this is getting a little bit, off topic now, or, I'm starting to ramble a bit. So I'm going to end it there. But, I really wanted to make a video about this because I truly feel this is, a conversation that I want to have with others. I want to create a space and a container where these types of conversations can happen, because it often feels like you're not allowed to point out harmful social norms, because the goal of most social environments is adaptation. And pointing out anything that could be harmful or disproportionately affects certain groups, usually the more sensitive people or people more prone to being affected by this sort of social standards that we've all come to live by, are treated as there's something wrong with them. And I truly want to create a space where we can have these conversations, because I see the pain that a lot of people are experiencing on a day-to-day. And I'm not trying to force anyone to be emotionally open. I don't think most social spaces are suitable for that. But the sad byproduct of that is that there's almost no social spaces or environments that are suitable for that, which leads to the sense of disconnection and loneliness that I think we all experience in Western culture. And it's especially bad if you don't have a strong foundation in terms of a strong family unit or a strong social circle. But even in those environments, it's not a guarantee that emotional honesty is valued or appreciated. In fact, it's often seen as a threat. People who haven't learned to model these behaviors and model these containers where negative emotional states can be held without trying to be fixed, solved, or seen as weak are very rare. And that's a really big area of society that I grieve over. And I truly hope with this channel and with these videos that I can create, the beginnings of a psychological atmosphere or container where people can truly share what's going on, because there is no connection without vulnerability. There is no connection without a container that can hold people. And like I said before in this video, I truly want to distinguish between trauma dumping and just being emotionally honest. But trauma dumping, I don't think it's fair on anyone. I think it's a lack of respect for the person you're listening to and their capacity and willingness to hold that space for you. But I do think there is a distinction. It just requires discernment, self-respect to honor that distinction and to honor where is appropriate and when it's not. But I also think the bigger problem is not so much in the person speaking. It's just as much of the responsibility of the person listening. How many people out there are willing to be the person who listens and says and asks the question, "How are you?" and truly cares about the response? That's what Simon Sinek said in a video. He said, "A true leader is someone who asks how you're doing and actually cares about the response." And I truly believe we need more of that leadership in the world. So yeah, if you listen to this whole video, I apologize as it went a little bit all over the place at parts, but I truly believe there's a kernel of wisdom and there is a grief that I am trying to share in the hopes that I can articulate something that someone else has experienced, and maybe in some respects 0.00001% at a time, we can make small changes in the way we interact with one another to be more compassionate, to listen better, to put aside our egos and our defendedness and our walls and truly see one another for the human beings that we all are. because I think the world is crying for connection, and we need more people who are willing to hold those spaces for one another. Okay, thank you. Take care.